Okay. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Kent Branch March 2023 educational presentation. My name is Cindy Robichaux, and I am part of the Kent Branch operating team and your host for this evening. Thank you for joining us. Get my slide going. We do have a couple of housekeeping items. Our presentations are recorded and available on our Kent Branch YouTube channel, which is open to anyone. Your microphones and cameras have been turned off, but we welcome your questions. If you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, you will see the bar with the chat icon. If you click on it, the chat box will open. Click here on the little arrow beside the word that says everyone and choose the word questions instead. Here you can type your message or questions for us or for the speaker, and Angela Churchill will be monitoring the chat box tonight. So thank you, Angela. Before we begin tonight's presentation, Bob Daly, member of the Lenape Nation and the Kent Branch member, offers a territory acknowledgement.
The land on which we gather, learn, and play is the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lunapawak, and Potawatomi peoples who have long-standing relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nations of this area include Chippewa of the Thames First Nation, the Caldwell First Nation, Chippewa of Kettle and Stony Point, Oneida Nation of the Thames, the Delaware Nation at Moraviantown, the Munsee Delaware Nation, and Walpole Island First Nation. Additionally, there is a growing urban Indigenous population who make the cities of southwestern Ontario home. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations of Turtle Island.
Thank you, Bob. So now let's get started. For anyone joining us for the first time, let me tell you a bit about Ontario Ancestors. Ontario Ancestors, also known as the Ontario Genealogical Society, is a not-for-profit registered charity which was founded in 1961. It is the largest genealogical society in Canada with a mission to bring together, encourage, and assist those in the pursuit of family history and the preservation of Ontario's genealogical heritage. Be sure to visit the website to learn more about the resources and support available to assist you in your family history research. Ontario Ancestors has over 30 branches and several special interest groups all across Ontario, and we are the Kent Branch. We focus on Kent County research and general family history, mentoring, education, and assistance. We host monthly educational presentations such as this one, and we have a fantastic resource library. Our Family History Resource Library is located on the second floor of the Chatham-Kent Public Library in Chatham. It holds over 40 years worth of historical and genealogical resources for Chatham-Kent. We are open to the public on Fridays and Saturdays from 1 p.m. till 5 p.m., and we try to accommodate other times by appointment. We always like to connect with people interested in genealogy and local history. You can connect with us at this email. You can also join our Kent Branch Facebook group, which has over 700 people who are interested in genealogy and Chatham-Kent history. And we also have a very comprehensive website with lots of resources for both our branch members, but also for the general public. So be sure to visit or drop us a line. We always like to tell you about some upcoming events that you might be interested in. First, on March 28th at 2 p.m., the Society will hold its next Family Tree Maker Users Group session. Many family historians use computer programs to keep track of their genealogy. One of the most popular programs is the Family Tree Maker. The Society held Family Tree Maker sessions over the last year, and they were very well attended. Whether you are new to using Family Tree Maker, have lots of experience, or just want to learn a little bit more, everyone is always welcome to attend. At the March session, a special guest will be joining. Pierre Clothier, who created the Charting Companion, will be joining to discuss this product and to take your questions. To attend, simply register on our Kent Branch website and the Zoom link will be emailed to you. Then you will want to mark your calendars for our next upcoming Kent Branch presentations. On April 14th at 7 p.m., we will be online and Henry Van Haren, a Wallaceburg historian, will join us to discuss the Baldoon settlers' big journey from Scotland to Kent County. Then on May 12th, we will actually be in person at the McKinley Reception Center on St. Clair Street in Chatham. Lisa Gilbert from the Kent Historical Society will discuss how to identify time periods from your ancestors' clothing and fashion in the photos. Both presentations are free and open to anyone. And again, the details will be posted on our Kent Branch website and our Facebook group. So now let's get to tonight's presentation. We are very pleased to have Kenneth Marks join us. Kenneth is retired from his 35-year career as a software executive. He attended UC Berkeley, the University of Southern California, and California State University, graduating with an ABS in mathematics. He spends many hours with the Ancestor Hunt website, as well as researching his own ancestors. Kenneth also maintains two other family history websites, www.markology.com and www.branhart.com. Kenneth, if I'm not saying those right, maybe you can correct me when you pop on.
Okay.
The Ancestor Hunt website, which was started in 2012, not only has tips and techniques, but currently tracks links to over 240,000 free online collections for the US and Canada, specializing in newspaper research for genealogy. In 2021 and 2022, Kenneth published 2 books, Learning More About Your Ancestors Online, Genealogical Guides for Newbies, Hobbyists, and Old Pros, and Finding Your Ancestors for Free, Your Guide to Best Online Genealogical Archives, Collections, and Websites. Tonight, Kenneth will share his tips and best practices from his many years of experience using online newspapers. So let's give Kenneth a warm virtual welcome. Kenneth, thanks for joining, and we'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's get my slides going here. Everybody hear me okay, I presume?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay. Me. Cindy gave you the title. This is another title, How to Become an Awesome Newspaper Researcher. Hopefully for those of you who are new, this will help you get started. For those of you who've been doing it for a while, you might pick up a few tips and techniques that make it easier and better for you to find stories about your ancestors. First of all, I want to thank you all for joining, and thanks to the invitation. Really, I don't do many webinars anymore. I don't travel much, but I do enjoy every once in a while talking about newspapers, because if it wasn't for newspapers, I probably wouldn't be doing genealogy anymore. It's that big of a deal for me. So let's get started. Why search newspapers? Obviously, you can get new names for your tree. You can discover dates and relationships. But best of all is you get to understand and read the stories of your ancestors' lives. I started with newspapers probably in 2010 online, and to me, it rapidly became the most important part of genealogy research that I did. It basically tells us much more about our ancestors than we otherwise could discover. And for personally, but when I started in my genealogy research, I knew only the names of 2 of my great-grandparents. So I had a lot of discovery to do about who everybody was, where do they fit, etc. But quickly, I discovered that what I was really interested in is what did they do? How did they live? How did they live their life? What happened to them in their lives? And newspapers became the key to that because when I started, all of my, well, except two of my relatives were either passed, only two were alive at the time, and I rapidly got all I could get from them. So newspapers became the way that I could discover what they did. I have two guiding missions in my genealogy research, and that is that my ancestors deserve to be remembered. I have many ancestors who didn't have children, some didn't have siblings, and if I didn't write down what I knew about them, their life stories would be gone forever. So that's kind of my driving reason for doing genealogy in the first place. So why research newspapers? The biggest single document in newspapers that most people look for are obituaries. And here's just a couple of examples. Just look at the right one really quickly, and just in those 10 lines, or maybe it's 11, there's an abundance of information. Yetta Rayful passed in Oakland, California, tells her death date, it tells the name of her husband, the fact that he had passed already. It talks about the fact that she had 3 children, 2 girls and 1 boy. She came from Germany. And in talking about her funeral, you find out when it was going to be held, where she was going to be interred, where the funeral was going to take place. That's a lot of information just in those 10 little lines. So obituaries are probably the most popular thing that people look at. And I would say there's probably 50 different kinds of categories of newspaper articles that are appropriate relative to genealogy. And I've just highlighted just a few of them that you may not even think of. First of all, if you had any criminals or victims of crime in your family tree, they probably will show up in a newspaper article. On the left, my great-great-uncle Max Bernstein was shot at because he refused to sell his pool hall to the people who were going to buy it. And then on the right, I had I think a second cousin once removed who was jilted by her fiance, and she took him to court. And you can't do that anymore, but at any rate, I found those interesting. Another one is, what kind of sports did they play? Or here's 2 examples. So you look on the left, you see Marks, which was my last name. That was my dad. He's in a box score for a baseball game, and he had a good day. He was 2 for 4 that day. And on the right, another ancestor. It discusses their bridge tournament that they were in. Weddings and anniversaries are another very important category that's often used a lot, and that is you can see on the left there's one that describes their anniversary of 50 years. Here's one in the middle about another one. This Herr Bronhardt, he's my 3rd or 4th great grandfather. And on the right is a discussion of an engagement. So the society page, or what was used to be called the women's page, often has a lot of information about weddings and anniversaries. And if there was a party of some sort, it generally described who went to the party and how they might be related. So those are very useful. Another one is advertisements. Believe it or not, I've got a couple of relatives that were in the paper in advertisements, and one on the left was a 3rd great uncle who created something called Bronhardt's tropical sauce back in the 1890s, and he sold it. And on the right was my great grandfather, and he's talking about how great the elixir that he was taking for his stomach worked. Unfortunately, 2 years after this advertisement was out, he died from a stomach ailment. So I don't know if that was that good of a elixir or not. So why, those are just a few examples. Why is newspaper research such a challenge? And there's a lot of different reasons. I'm going to go into each one of these individually. The bottom line is newspapers historical newspapers are generally quite old. And that in itself is a challenge. So let me talk about each of these individually to get a little bit of background of why it's so difficult. First of all, the quality of the original material. If you're trying to scan newspapers and make them digitally available online, either in a PDF format where it's not searchable, but it's browsable, or if a database is created from optical character recognition, it all comes down to, first of all, what is the quality of the original material? Was the original newspapers, were they yellow? Were they brittle? Did they have creases? They have ink spots all over them. The type that was used, was it broken? And finally, font variations, especially non-English. So the quality of the original material is the biggest single factor in determining whether you're going to be able to find things or not if you're doing a search into a newspaper database. The next is the quality of the scan. Are you scanning from original newsprint, or are you just scanning from microfilm? And then furthermore, is the microfilm a copy of a previous microfilm or even a third generation? The more the microfilm gets copied, the less quality it is. And the end result is it makes it difficult to find things. This, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but basically there's two kinds of scanning. There's bitonal and grayscale. Bitonal is basically, it's either black or white. There's two colors. Grayscale, you've got 256 colors and variations between pure white and pure black. Bitonal is better for creating an index, but and it's cheaper, but a lot of people don't want to spend the money to use full grayscale because it costs much. Here's an example at the bottom, Chronicling America, which is the website that the Library of Congress has built. They require that they use grayscale, and the cost is 13 times as much. It's bitonal scanning. So that's a factor. If you've done any newspaper research and you've seen a lot of really old newspapers and it looks terrible, it's probably because it was bitonal in the first place. And once it's scanned, you just can't make letters out. And when they can't make letters out, that means it's very difficult to search. Quality of the optical character recognition. OCR in multi-fonts came out in 1974, and the software is, some are better than others. As software is, some software is better than other software trying to do the same thing. And there's different variations in the OCR process. Sometimes it's just a single pass, and then sometimes there's multi-pass, 2, 3, or 4 passes through looking at the scanned image, and then they compare the results and pick the best one. Lastly, user correction. Now, you may not have seen this much. The only vendor that I've seen it do a lot is a company called DL Consulting. They're out of New Zealand, and they have a piece of software called Veridian. I don't believe they have any Canadian customers. They've got several in the US and several throughout the world. The Swiss Library, the Israel National Library, Estonia, New Zealand, and a couple of others. And then in the United States, there's Illinois, California, and many others. So they're the only one that has this ability to correct. And what does that mean? You do a search, you find something, and the text result of the scan is shown along with the image itself. And you can actually go in and correct the text result. It's kind of a pay it forward kind of deal. And so all you do is you register as a user on one of the websites that Veridian software runs on, and you can actually correct the text so that the next person has a little bit easier time finding things. The next is the quality of the writing and the typesetting. Did the original author care about spelling the names correctly in the first place? Did the typesetter set it as the author intended, or did they make changes? And finally, did the typesetter hyphenate correctly? Hyphenation was used a lot in the quote old days, because they were trying to save space, trying to save the number of pages in the newspaper that they were delivering on a daily or weekly basis, and also the amount of ink and paper itself. So did they hyphenate correctly? So the writing and typesetting comes into play as well. So let's talk about, and just as an aside, I'm going to be talking for a while, and then I'm going to demonstrate many of these skills after I finish talking. So the first one is advanced search. There's two types, and I'll say this here, but there's two types of newspaper databases. One is browse only, and that is usually a page is scanned and a PDF is created. So you can look at a page image all at once, and then you can go from page 1 to the next image would be page 2, etc. And that's just like looking through microfilm or even flipping through original newsprint. So that's browsing. Searching requires scanning, the OCR process, the building of the index database, etc. Now, when you come across a website that provides a search capability, there's usually two kinds. One is called what I call basic search, and that is where you just essentially put a name or something in a search box, hit go, and then see what happens. Advanced search, which most of these websites have, has the ability for you to have optional type fields. For example, you can search by date range. You can search, if it's a database of, say, 15 newspaper titles, you can choose to search only a specific newspaper. There's something called proximity search. Proximity search, if you don't know what that is basically, it says you are looking for word A within 5, 10, 15, or 20 words from word B. That's a proximity search. That's not in a lot of databases, but more and more it's people are implementing it, and it is quite useful. You can search headlines only. And then, of course, you have Boolean searches, which says word A and word B, or word A and not word B, is in a specific page. So my recommendation always is to use advanced search because you have much more tools available to you to find what you're looking for. Okay, this skill is probably the most important. And why do I say misspell on purpose? Remember that when the OCR process is looking at a bunch of ink, black dots on a white page, that essentially that's all it is. They don't see characters. They only see the presence or absence of a pixel that has a black dot or white dot. And they have to, the software converts those into a letter. But if you think about it, and there's some examples here, I'll go through in a moment, many letters look very similar to other letters. So if the quality of the original newsprint was not very good, and let's take H and B, for example. If you look at a lowercase h and a lowercase b, they're almost identical, except that a lowercase h with a splatter of ink underneath underneath the hump there, that looks like a B, or capital D and an O. They look very much the same. Another one is C, lowercase c, and E. And then at the top there, I've got the two letters R and N. If they're scrunched together, they might look like an M. So why do I say misspell on purpose? Well, again, you are matching it. You're trying to discover letters, which are words or names, and you try by changing the letters. That's why I call change the letters. I'll give you some examples later. I'll demonstrate how powerful those are. But that is probably the biggest single impactful technique that you can use. Go to the next one. Hyphenation. I talked earlier about how much hyphenated words were used in, quote, the old days, saving ink, saving paper. And so you want to take advantage of that. If you've got a surname, for example, in your family tree of Montgomery, Montgomery itself is not going to show up on every line. You might have MONT with a hyphen on one line, and then the next line would be Montgomery. So it's to your advantage to search not only for Montgomery, the complete word, but also for the syllables. So you could search for MONT hyphen, or you could search for Montgomery, GOMERY. Believe it or not, the word splits are kind of unusual sometimes. You might search for MONTGOM hyphen and ERY. And so that's another thing, it's another skill that you should use. And again, I'll demonstrate this as well. Next one is what I call browse and jump. Remember, we talked about browsing for databases that just have PDFs. Oftentimes, if publication had, say, 4 pages or 8 pages, let's say 8, or maybe even 12 or 20, the vital section, which is if you're looking for obituaries, for example, they could be on page 13, excuse me. And so you can go on one date, say the date the person died if you're looking for an obit, then you look at the next day on page 13, and then the next day on page 13. So you take advantage of the fact that they oftentimes published the same subset or category of the newspaper on the same page from day to day. Okay, another one that's useful is abbreviations, and this is a big one. Again, I'll demonstrate this. It's unbelievable how much, again, with the desire in the old days to save paper, save ink, they used abbreviations a lot. And I've got a whole list on my website of abbreviations that you can incorporate. But here's just some. WM for William, that's a very common one. GEO for George, ELIZ for Elizabeth, etc. But not just names. Title, sergeant, captain, president, general, etc. And the same is true of street names. I would encourage you, by the way, to do searches for a person's address if it's in a city. And 123 Elm Street may be in the database as or on the newspaper as 123 Elm ST. And the same is true for avenue, lane, court, etc. That's another area that you can use to your advantage. Another one is Mr. and Mrs. Up until I'd say about the 1960s and 70s, married women were not in the newspaper under their given name, which is kind of goofy if you ask me. But at any rate, Mary Fairchild, that was her birth name, she married William Jones, and she's in the newspaper, Mrs. William Jones. You don't see a Mary Jones anywhere. But the only time you would see Mary Fairchild is if she was a child and she was in the newspaper, or if she was divorced or widowed, she would then be referenced as likely to be referenced as Mrs. Mary Jones. And I don't think I talked about nicknames. I'll just bring that up. I should have talked about that in abbreviations. Another one is nicknames. And this is especially true because some people use a nickname, and their nickname might be in the newspaper, not their formal given name, if you will. So what you want to do is you want to try these skills. I'm going to demonstrate these now in a moment. And you'll see how powerful they are in terms of finding things. And I'll talk about my website later, but let's move on. And let's see if I can change to here. Okay, I'm using the Our Ontario website as an example here. I'm going to use two websites to show things to you. One is the Our Ontario site, and the other is the California digital newspaper site. It's actually the first one I ever used back in, I think it was 2010, actually, maybe a couple years later, I don't recall. But that one has about the similar types of capabilities, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use that one. So this is our Ontario site. As you can see here, it says search newspapers. That's your basic search box. What you want to do is you want to enter your search in there. Now, there's also something, remember I talked about advanced search? Let's look at advanced search and see what it has. Now, in the advanced search, you've got additional capabilities. I can't remember how many titles are in the Ontario. It looks like about 50. You can limit your search to a specific newspaper. And you just pick it, for example. It has a fuzzy search capability. I don't know if you know what fuzzy search is, but I'll oversimplify the explanation. Normally, any search that you do is an exact search. Your search criteria is matched against the database. So if you're looking for somebody's surname who is Miller, for example, it would search those exact characters, M-I-L-L-E-R, against what's in the database. And it has to be an exact hit in order to show it to you as a result. Fuzzy search says, doesn't have to be exact, and it could be a little bit different. For example, instead of Miller, it could be Milter, M-I-L-T-E-R, or with one or two different letters different. That's what fuzzy search is. Instead of an exact search, it's called a close search. Remember I talked about proximity searches over. It's a proximity search capability. Again, you can put in word A and then say, I want to match that word against the database, but it has to be within 5 words or 10 words or whatever you say from word B. You can put in a complete phrase. You've probably have done Google searches where if you want to search for an exact name, you put quotes around the phrase that you're looking for. That's essentially what this containing the phrase does. And then lastly, you can also say, I want whatever I put in my search criteria, I want all that, but I don't want to include pages that have the none of the words capability here. So that's just an example of the advanced search. Let's look at the California one real quick and look at their advanced search. And let's do a basic search first. And you're going to see me do a search for the word Bronhardt quite a lot because that's actually a fairly unique name in my tree. And with the advanced search here, you can limit it to a decade, a publication, a category, a word count on the page, etc. So you've got a lot more capability. And here's other things you can do. I talked about the date. You can talk about the title. You can search within the full text or just within the headline. And you can search, you normally want to search the text, but you can search other summaries. And then you could also search only issues that are available to view. In this database, they have some newspapers that don't have the image completely implemented yet. So that's another example of an advanced search. I would highly recommend that whatever you're going to do, I would start with advanced search. Easy to get trapped into the throwing a word in a box and hitting go and seeing what happens. Now that we're on Bronhardt, I want to show you something here real quick. Find. There's one there. I want to show you the results of a bad OCR process. Put in his full name here. These are all pretty good. It's interesting, the California website, because it's been around for so long, there's been a lot of user correction that's been done. So that really helps for future users to be able to search against a better database. Let me see if I can find one that's not very good. This is not bad. On the left, first of all, on the right, you can see the article and the highlighted words for Bronhardt are in yellow. Well, over on the left is the textual representation after the OCR process for that particular article. And as you can see, there are some words in there that don't exist. The word OEAO is actually dead. And then you see the garbage here, XF/T, the A, blah, 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 freeze. That's, let me turn that on. As you can see, the text is not a good representation of what's in the article. So it looks like some, and here, as you look down here, pleased to learn the report. And you can see that some of the words are not as they were originally printed. So this is a pretty good example actually for a 115-year-old, 117-year-old newspaper, but a lot of them is real bad. And so that's where this user correction, if the software you're using has that capability, in a few minutes fixing it for the next person. Let's go back. And Samuel Bronhardt has 541 hits, right? It shows 1 to 20 of 541. Now, remember I talked about the fact that a lowercase b and a lowercase h looked pretty similar? Let's change the search to BRAUNBART. See what happens. This website's a little slow, but here we go. There's another 31 for Bronbart. Now that's not his name, it's Bronhardt, but because of the OCR process, it wasn't able to convert all those dots to an H. It picked up a B. See that? So that's a pretty important thing to try. Another one is, let's try a hyphenated word. ERAUN hyphen. Now this would pick up somebody whose last name is Braun without the hyphen. And as you can see, there are some there. I'm going to put in the first word, name. See what happens there. It doesn't show too many there, but I think you get the idea. There's one right there, Samuel Braun. So that's an example of hyphenated words. Let's go back to Ontario. Go back to the basic search. And I want to look for somebody named William McNair. Let's see what that shows. That shows us 38 results. See there, William McNair, the results here. There he is again. And again, this is William McNair, etc. Okay. Now let's go back. Remember I talked about abbreviating some of the words. Let's go back. WM, which is the abbreviation for the name William. See what happens. Look at that, 137 of them. If that isn't an example that would spur you to use abbreviations, I don't know what it is, but you can see WM McNair, etc. WM McNair. Let's try another one. We talked about titles as well. We're going to try Charles Lindbergh, the pilot. See if he is in at any. Did I hit that right? Sorry about that. Let's see what's in there. There's three. There's only three. These are for Charles and Lindbergh, the pilot. But let's try Colonels. He was a colonel. And that is, there you see Colonel Lindbergh, etc. And there's 228 of them. Quite a lot. Now let's try an abbreviation of colonel and see what happens. And I haven't tried this one before. Wow, there's 287 of them. So you can see the, whoops. Yeah. There's the article there. You can see the Lindbergh. You can see the power of using abbreviations. We originally only had 3 using his full name, Charles Lindbergh. I mean, everybody knows him as Charles Lindbergh, but in the newspapers, they put him in as Colonel Lindbergh. So there's 3 versus 287. So again, please use abbreviations. Let's go back and back to the California site. And let's try more common name. Let's see somebody named Wilson. There should be a lot of those. Yes, well, there's 2 million of them. But sometimes an N comes out as an M. Let's try Wilsom. And there's another 864. The word Wilsom, Wilsom, is not a word of a surname of anybody I know. Maybe you do, but there's a good example. I'm in the California today. There's a city in Los Angeles and Oakland called Fairfax Avenue. If I were to search for an address, actually, obviously, I'll put the street number in there. If I search for something on Fairfax Avenue, as you can see, there's 4,300 some odd hits for Fairfax Avenue. But let's try AVE, the abbreviation. And you see, look at that, 6,600 of them. So it's obvious, if you think about it, that the abbreviations were highly used. In fact, they're more used oftentimes than the full word itself. So you must use abbreviations to take full use of the newspaper database. Let's try something else. Let's try, let me name Margaret Wilson. Go for it like that, right? $3,575. Well, what if she was in the newspaper with the name Maggie? And there's another 319. So you can see that nicknames, abbreviations, swapping the letters, all that kind of stuff is going to get you a lot more results. So I want to go back to my presentation and make sure I've covered everything. And I'll just revisit these again. There's a complete list of not a complete list, but there's a list of about 40 or 50 letter pairs in an article on my website. So you can see others than the ones that I've listed. It showed you the H and the B. C and E is another one that comes up quite a lot. Talked about hyphenation. Again, use the syllables in addition to the complete word. Talked about browse and jump, didn't show you that because the two sites that I had were had search capability. Talked about abbreviations. This is a big one. Please use it. Mr. and Mrs. don't really need to show that, but I think you get the idea there. So I guarantee you that if you try these skills,
Kenneth,
Yeah.
we can still see the California site, not back to your PowerPoint.
oh really? How'd that happen? Okay. A new share. I thought I was still sharing that. I apologize.
No problem.
Well, let me, how would I? Let me quickly go through these again. I don't mean to be redundant, but these are the 4 or 5 key things that you need to know to be successful. Misspelling on purpose, big one. Hyphenation, very useful. I found in many paragraphs in older newspapers, as many as 30% of the lines have a hyphen in them at the end. So you're missing out if you're not choosing to search by syllables. Browse and jump, we talked about. Abbreviations, another huge one. That's massive. I think you can see by some of the results that we had that they gave you more hits than the full name itself. So that's a big one. Mr. and Mrs. Just be aware of that when you're looking for women in old newspapers. Okay, now, how am I doing on time? I think I'm doing okay. I just want to show you a little bit about my website. And then we can go to questions. Name of the site is The Ancestor Hunt. Make sure the is in there. And this has been in existence for about 10 years. This is the homepage. There's all kinds of stuff. But quickly, I'll just go through what's on the homepage. Recent articles. I probably publish 5 to 8 articles a day. And so it's good to know the recent articles that have been written and posted. It's usually it's the most 100 recent. About 2 years ago, I started doing what I call quick sheets. They're basically quick reference guides. There's about 70 of them, and they talk about all things genealogy, all different kinds of categories or documents, how to do things, etc. So that's useful. There are 24 resource categories for United States curated links, and there's 6 for Canada. I started the Canada ones. I think I started with a newspaper one in Canada about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'll show you what some of those are. And then I've got research toolkits. The last 2 at Placefinders, those are both United States only at this juncture. This recent one came out last week, and that's called Finding Your Ancestors' Obituaries. The second one, which is that I did about 4 months ago, is called Finding Your Ancestors for Free. And then the first one I did about 15 months ago is called Learning More About Your Ancestors. And that essentially is an offshoot of those quick reference guides that I talked about a little earlier. And we're here. I show you, created something called, under resources, is all the different categories. Again, some of them are US only, but these are all the different categories of curated links that I have. Immigration records, institutional records, naturalization, mortuary photos, school records, tax records, voter records. Again, those are all the US. But I've also created a capability here called the by location page. And this, there's the United States and Canada in it. And if you click on a state, for example, Arizona, it lists all the different categories. I'll show you an example here in a moment. Let's move down to Canada. In Canada, let's pick Ontario. There are 6 categories. There's newspapers, obituaries, birth, marriage, and death records, photos, yearbooks, and directories. I think probably the most popular are newspapers and directories. And in fact, I was saying this to Cindy earlier, the newspapers one for Ontario, if you count 50 states plus DC plus 10 provinces plus the territories, that's 60 some odd. Ontario newspapers links to those free online newspapers is the second most popular one of all the newspaper sites that I have. I think the most popular is probably New York. Directories, Ontario is the most popular one. In fact, I think there's a couple thousand links to free online directories. It's hard to keep up actually with all the digitization of directories in Ontario that's going on. So I'll just show you an example here. Now, can you see that free online Ontario city directories? There's about
Yes.
big
I
long,
see it.
big long list. This will go on for days. If there's any for Kansas, I don't know if there is. No, I don't want to scan it. I don't want to scroll that long. It gets kind of boring, but anyway, you get the idea. There's over 2,000 in Ontario where and these are basically what these are. These are links to an online city directory, in this case for the city of Brantford in 1963. And for free online newspapers, there's about the total for Canada, I think is around 4,500 titles. And Ontario's the second biggest, Quebec's the biggest. And but there's over 1,000 free online newspaper links for Ontario. And I think Cindy's going to talk a little bit about some of the activities you folks have got going in Kent about that. And what you're doing as far as I think the card system, I think it's called. At any rate, that is pretty much a quick overview. With the time I had, I wanted to hit all the hot spots. But the moral of the story here is try these skills that we talked about. If you do, especially the changing the letters and the abbreviations, you're going to get a lot better results. So with that, I will open it for questions.
Great. Thank you so much.
you.
Yeah, I think it's very important. You raised some really, really good tips about especially the variations. I'm guilty of just jumping in and throwing my ancestor's name in there without really considering the different variations and, thinking out of the box. So that's an awesome tip right in itself. So thank you for sharing that one. Angela, are there any questions?
Have to unmute myself. Yeah, one is when you were doing your searches, you were using quotes almost every time. Is that what you commonly use when you're doing your searches?
It depends. If the problem with using quotes is it's good if you're looking for a person's first and last name, or first name, middle name, and last name, or first name, middle initial, and last name. That's great. But if any one of those, let's just say my full name is Kenneth Robert Marks. If I put in Kenneth Robert Marks, I'm probably not going to find anything, right? I put in Kenneth R. Marks, maybe a little bit less. I take the R out, I might get Kenneth Marks or anybody with a different middle name, for example. But I found you should use quotes. I start with quotes, but then I do it without quotes. If remember the example for the Ontario on the advanced search where they said not words, I would use that heavily if I'm looking for a person's name, because if your name is similar to somebody that's a lot more famous than you are, you do a search and you're going to, with the quotes, you're going to find 95% of them are that person. They're not you or the target person that you're looking for. So I use both. I use quotes a lot to start with, but then I back off and try different variations.
Okay, and my other question is, when you accumulate all of these little clippings and things, how do you store them, index them, keep them sorted so you can easily find them and that kind of thing?
Well, that's a great question, because that's the genealogist's challenge with anything we find, isn't it? Is you don't want to have you've got something that misnamed or unnamed, some file in one of your folders on your computer, and then you ask yourself, where did I find that? And you don't want to have to go back and search for it again. What I do with newspapers is I put the target person in caps, their surname. Then I put a comma and then their first name. Space, hyphen, space. I put the name, the title of the publication. And then I put space, hyphen, space, the date. And then with the year, four-digit year, followed by the month, followed by the day. And then I put in the page number. Some people wouldn't call a number. I don't do that. I just put page number. So I start with the name. Then this is in the file name now. And then I put the title of the publication and the date and the page number. I put that in the title. And then I sort them generally by family grouping, maybe. Now,
Okay.
let's talk about downloading real quick, because this is another way that you're going to get yourself in trouble. Most sites have the capability to clip a portion of the page. If you clip the portion of the page, especially if you download it in JPEG format, you've got this little clipping, maybe 2 inches by 2 inches or 1 inch by 4 inches or whatever, depending on the size of the article. And then later on, you bring it up and you try to zoom in on it, and it's all fuzzy. Happens to everybody. What I do is I generally download the entire page in PDF format, because that is zoomable and you don't lose the ability to read it. And then if I'm using the clipping as part of say a website article that I'm writing or in a book or whatever, then I will zoom the PDF to the proper size and then clip the article that I want to use elsewhere. So you need to be sensitive to the fact that just clipping an article and downloading it can likely cause problems in the fuzziness of being able to read it. So you can do one or two things. You can download the PDF, which is what I would recommend. Or if you clip it, make sure that you zoom the whole image on your computer big enough so that if you clip it, you can shrink it and you still be able to read it. Does that answer the question?
Yes. I tend to sometimes forget to put all the information, and then I'm retracing my steps all over and over again,
I know,
right?
that's-
So,
yeah.
And then we had another comment about using Clues, CLOOZ, to track people and re-inventory newspaper clippings. I don't know anything about that site, so.
I don't use it myself, but what I've heard of it, it's a database where you can collect things. So, I presume that would be helpful.
That's all the questions for now. Thanks.
Wow, either everybody's bored to death or overwhelmed or stupefied, or maybe I hope I helped somebody here.
No, if you can read the chat, tons of comments about great demonstration, truly appreciated, lots of great tips to go try, wonderful presentation. So I think you did the opposite. I think you did a great job, and you left some tips and ideas for people to go and to try. I just want to mention that the handout, so Kenneth himself didn't really have a handout, but newspapers are so important to us here in Chatham, Kent, that that's one of our go-tos when we're doing research or we have people send in requests. So in the handout, what I actually did was I gathered up all the newspapers that are in Chatham, Kent. So that's what the CK stands for. Not being from Chatham, Kent, I'm actually from Essex. I did not know all the newspapers that were available. And all the little towns have their own newspapers through the years, obviously. So we gathered a list of, you know, in Tilbury, they had the Tilbury Times from such a date and such a date. You know, Chatham has so many, Blenheim, all the little towns have newspapers. So that is a list of the different newspapers that are located in the different towns in their libraries. So if you're looking for an ancestor, you know, in Tilbury or Blenheim, you might want to think out of the box of just thinking of Chatham. Although the Chatham newspaper, another tip I have found is that think out of the box where your ancestor might have lived. So for example, because Essex County is so close, one of the big newspapers is the Windsor Star, and previous to that, it was the Evening Record, and the City Borders were all precursors to that. And in there, they had correspondents that used to write articles or do the news from outlying areas. So quite often, even though it is the Windsor Star, in there, there's very often information about Chatham and, you know, Ridgetown and all the other smaller. So thinking out of the box of the newspaper. So that's what the handout is actually the newspapers that are in Kent County, and they are on microfilms, usually located in the libraries of those towns. We do have microfilm interlibrary loan. So if you think you would like to see something on there, you can either order it into your local library. And if you're not in the area of Kent County, you could always send us an email and ask us to request it to bring it in, and we'll gladly look up anything for you, you know, and then we'll send it off to you digitally. So that's what the handout is. And there's also a couple other websites on there as well that Kenneth did mention tonight. So yeah, so Angela, are there still more questions, or Kenneth, did you have anything last?
No, the only thing I would mention is I have a lot more tips and techniques on the website. If you go to on my website, the resources menu item, and I think one of the first ones is newspapers, not newspaper links, but newspapers. There's a list of about, I don't know, 20 or 25, maybe 30 articles about newspapers, some of which include techniques. Also in the quick reference guides, there's probably 12 or 13 of those that have much more information and many more tips that you can use to make your search work out better for you.
I see that you have a big fan in Jan Murphy, so she's suggesting that people get your books and your quick sheets. That basically is that's the insight that they're looking for right there.
Yeah, Jan's we kind of support each other. I actually I had her write an article for me one time. I can't remember what it was about. I think it was about Substack or something that she was involved in.
Right.
She's
yeah. You had Bill, who says very helpful. Thank you. He's joining from New Mexico. And where are you tonight again, Kenneth? You're in Arizona, was that
I'm
right?
in Arizona today, yeah.
Right. That's awesome.
I spend half my time here and half my time in California.
Well, that's the joys of Zoom and being able to reach
that's great.
Speakers like yourself and have you, you know, virtually attend.
Well, I really appreciate you inviting me. It means a lot to me. I try to be, you know, it's easy to be, let me see if I can say this right. Americans can tend to be American-centric, as you well know. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I thought, well, you know, because I looked around at what was available in Canada for finding things, and I didn't see a lot. So I thought, well, let's try with newspapers first and see if we can curate a bunch of free online links for folks. And as I said, there's about 4,500 titles, I think, now from Canada that are in my list. And then I added some of the other categories. And, you know, it's fun to do. It helps people. That's what I'm all about. That's why I do it. You know, I'm too old to do anything else. So I do research.
Well, we're glad you do. And as Jan mentioned, please visit his website. There's some great things there. And that's actually how we connected with you, is that I had reached out to ask you if you would provide something for one of our newsletters, and you graciously did. And I use your website all the time. So I thought while we were there, I thought, hey, let's ask and see if he'll actually join us and give us some more information. So we thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us on a Friday night. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel as soon as it's edited. So thanks everyone for joining, and hopefully we see you next month. Thank you. Goodbye now. Thanks, Kenneth.
Thank you very much.